Hello, I'm Tom Martin, and welcome to another episode of A San Francisco Conservative, the new podcast series, in which I have the great opportunity to converse with my dear friend, David Parker. What I bring to the table is that I'm a lifelong journalist. I produce stories for Diane Sawyer at Good Morning America, for Charles Kuralt at CBS News, and for many other folks, Jane Pauley, for one, at NBC News. I was sort of bounced around all over the place, but I love asking thought-provoking questions. And what's often missing from what we read in the newspapers or catch, on the evening news or the 24-hour news cycle is the historical context. And David is the author of two brilliant books, Income and Wealth and A San Francisco Conservative, which gave this series its title. And every time we talk, I learn something new. And I'm sure that's going to be the case again today. So, hey, David, how are you today?
I'm fine. Tom, how are you today?
I'm doing well. It's a beautiful summer day here in Connecticut. I always offer the disclaimer, I'm not actually by the Golden Gate Bridge, by the city by the bay, but I wish I was there. We should do one in person just to throw people off sometime. I think that'd be
fun. I'll go to Connecticut. You come.
That's right. You come. Yeah. We'll be ships passing in the night. But like I said a moment ago to our audience, I love how you have really, you really literally went back to school. You're a lifelong educator, teaching school children there in the San Francisco public schools, music and many other things, I'm sure, the life lessons, and being a great inspiration to them generation after generation. And you at some point, you went back to school yourself because you said, well, why don't you tell us what drew you to go back to school, basically?
Well, I had epiphanies at a very young age about money and finance a little bit. And I started to write. And my wife says, I think you better take a class in economics. I said, okay. So I went to Golden Gate University in San Francisco, which specialized in adult students. And I started off in a graduate class because I already have a master's degree in music. I sat in the graduate class in economics. I says, I can't do this. So I sat in the first year class of economics for freshmen. Oh my God, look at the math you have to do. I said, okay, if I'm gonna do this, I'm gonna do this. So I took 67 units straight of math and economics. And then I wrote my book. Then, she was right. So
wow.
Now I know what I'm talking about. And I didn't write the book to say how to do it because I already did it. I was going back to school to see how I did it a little bit. But I was really interested in theory of money and economics, timeless theory. And I'm a San Francisco conservative, but I'm really a classical liberal or a classical conservative. I'm really interested in historic. It's a historic split, liberal conservative. There's nothing new about that. Some people are Apollo, I'm a reason. Some people are more romantic. They're Dionysus, but it's the legitimate opinions. Shiva has 4 arms. This is just 2 of 4 arms. There really is more than one way to skin a cat. And so now I have, you've seen all the writing and reading I've been doing since school. I have approximately 35,000 hours of postgraduate work, concentrated, annotated reading and writing in political economy. So combined with my knowledge and success in business and my long years of teaching and my long years of playing professional music, it all came together. I can't stop writing, actually.
Yeah. Well, I love how those different threads came together. As I've often said, I loved my professors. I went to Georgetown University in Washington, D.C. many years ago, majored in philosophy.
That's a great university. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. And I certainly respect and respected my professors, but it's different when you're out there, working in the trenches and you're applying these principles that you learn. It's a different thing to be sitting in a, collegiate office with the students coming by and, you're forced to write papers and whatnot. If you're really not there in the trenches where the economic forces are at work. Right. So I love the historical context that you give to all of this. And that leads me to something I wanted to discuss with you today.
Let me add one more thing. Besides the historical context, my examples throughout all my writing are genuine examples from business and from teaching and from playing professional jazz music. My books don't read like an academic book, even though they're scholarly writing.
I would agree with you there. Yes, very actionable, practical, and it really, I think one of our conversations, you said Aristotle should be distributed to every congressman or senator because it's classic wisdom, ancient wisdom, but it still applies. It's just as relevant. So
it's better. But he wrote, if you read Aristotle and didn't, or if I read it to you and didn't tell you who I'm reading, you would not know it's Aristotle. He sounds like us, and the subject matter is the same, and all the arguments are better. It's really such a higher level of civilization. It's like God sent a thunderbolt to 5th century Athens and created a spectacularly brilliant civilization.
Amazing.
And it's never been repeated. It's so high, and the same arguments. It's
amazing. Yeah.
Amazing.
Well, with that historical background, maybe not going back that many years exactly, but I wanted to talk to you about one power broker on the world stage right now, Vladimir Putin. The United States does not live in a bubble. And so we're all concerned about what's happening in Ukraine and trying to say, well, how do we reason with this leader? In the news, again, I hate to get into specifics because someone may be listening to this, a month after we recorded. I know there's some flexibility there when people might listen, but at the time that we're recording this, our president, Joe Biden, has made an offer. I thought the U.S. policy was we do not negotiate with terrorists. We do not broker hostage exchanges, but that's what they're talking about now. There are 2 Americans being held there in Russia. And so apparently Biden has said, well, there's this great arms trader, sounds very dangerous to me, who's been sentenced to 25 years. We'll be happy to send him back home if you release those 2 Americans. And at least at the moment, they're saying, well, Vladimir Putin is not really responding. I mean, let's have a rational conversation. What do you make of Putin?
He's like a black hole. There's no interlocutor. There's no one to talk to. He's completely in his own world. If you go back, it's a famous expression, those who don't know history are condemned to repeat it. Santayana, 1905, Harvard University. But that's only half true. In my opinion, those who do know history are also condemned to repeat it. Ukraine. This is why are we doing World War II for no reason whatsoever? World War I, World War II had no reason, and neither does Ukraine.
What are the mistakes you've seen, leading up to where we are right now?
We possibly made a mistake by not considering seriously Putin's point of view. We figured he has no point of view. He just himself, he has his own visions, megalomaniac visions for a greater Russia. And so we just wave him off when in fact, he does have some legitimate reasons. He says Russia has to have a port on the Black Sea. So if he wants Crimea, and he says Crimea has no ethnic Ukrainians living there. It's always been part of the Soviet Union, and all of a sudden it belongs to Ukraine. And says, no, we need that port as part of Russia. That's a legitimate consideration. And when the Soviet Union was formed, or in 1918, they made arbitrary boundary lines for the countries of Eastern Europe, almost like the Middle East has arbitrary boundary lines for all those countries. And they gave Ukraine all kinds of land that was never historically part of Ukraine. The key to Khrushchev comes from Ukraine. He didn't give it a second thought because he says Ukraine is not going to leave the Soviet Union. They speak Russian. They're nobody gave it any thought that Ukraine had twice the land that it normally had. And plus Donbass is, I think it's plains. not quite defensible, not many people living there. So we might just give them some Donbass and call it a day, because maybe we should have done that from day one. That's my point. Maybe we should have just done that from day one. That was sloppy lines. Putin wants some kind of buffer between the NATO countries, and Ukraine is showing that they're not interested in being part of Russia anymore. And so no one had thought about that before. And Putin says, wait a second, well, we want a little buffer here. So had we addressed that a little more seriously from day one, okay, you can have this part of Donbass and you can have Crimea, and that's it. And maybe the whole thing could have been avoided.
Well, I want to ask a little bit more about this, but I just want to take a moment to let our viewers, our listeners know that this is a San Francisco conservative. You're looking at a San Francisco conservative. No, not me. My friend David Parker right there. And again, that is the title of David's newest book. And prior to that, another great book is Income and Wealth, written by David Parker. So let's get back to the situation in Ukraine. As usual on a topic like this, our political leaders have quite a spectrum. I'm just going to say all over the map. Maybe they are all over the map, but some people have said, democracy is at stake here. We must go in. And certainly when I read about, Russian forces bombing, daycare centers and hospitals and mothers fleeing with their little children, it's very concerning. But it sounds like you're saying the U.S. should not go in there. We don't want another World War II, World War III.
Well, every time the U.S. has gone in after World War II, we seem to have lost. It's like it's none of our business. And Ukraine does not have a great history. It has no history of democracy. It has a great history of superstition, and has a very bad history of how they treated the Jews during World War II. They just lined them all up. So but Ukraine all of a sudden has come together in a very great way. So the world wants to help Ukraine, myself included, but we're not going to do it with sending our troops on the ground. But we have Americans all over the place. Fighters from Afghanistan and Iraq are helping as mercenaries all over Ukraine, and we're giving them all kinds of technical. That's the way to do it. And the world sanctions. Maybe the world should invent something and call it the United Nations. That doesn't exist. But that'd be a nice thing. Maybe the United Nations would step in and say nations must not solve their problems from war. That would be a new concept. But since that's not happening, the way it is happening now, how is it going to resolve? It's going to resolve with a negotiation anyway, because we're going to give them some Donbass, and we're not going to argue about Crimea, and then they're going to stop because they're not doing too well. And that's Henry Kissinger said that. That's how it's going to come down. Yeah. But they have a famous, who once was the richest man in Russia. His name is Khodorkovsky. He was the richest man, and Putin put him in prison because he was getting too uppity. 10 years in prison. Now he's living in London as a dissident. He says, you don't negotiate with a gangster. If you're in a weaker position. If you're in a weaker position, you don't negotiate with it because they don't care. So you have to be careful about appeasement. So there's no, but we'll negotiate it. That's how it's going to resolve. It has to resolve that way.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see. You could.
He says one more thing. Every time there's a problem in the Soviet Union, there's a regime change. Some huge revolution, something really drastic happens, so maybe that'll happen. Maybe some insiders working with Putin, even the citizens of Russia. Maybe someone's going to something will happen. He thinks that Putin, this is his death. He shouldn't have done this. He's going to find himself out of office.
Yeah, interesting. So I don't know if it's shifting gears exactly, but I want to ask about another global superpower. China, of course, and some people have said by not being more aggressive. I mean, we're certainly providing the Ukrainian people and the government there with weapons, a lot of weapons. But some have said, well, China is testing our commitment in terms of Taiwan, and by not being more aggressive, by going into Ukraine, by confronting these Russian forces ourselves, which of course probably would be World War III. They're saying, well, China can, she can learn, sees that we're holding back, and therefore we're leaving Taiwan vulnerable. Maybe we shouldn't care, but what do you make about that whole dynamic with China and Taiwan and the United States?
Same. If China attacks Taiwan, we say we're going to step in. But Kissinger had another good comment. He's 99. He was talking to Judy Woodruff on PBS NewsHour. Sharp as a crack. He says, don't put a red line in the sand, or whatever it's called, because ambiguity is the key. Let them think we're going to do something, and maybe we will up to a point. But we're not going to send and start a war over Taiwan, some island in the China Sea, even if the people are democratic. They have but their history, they're not Western peoples. They're behaving more Western as Ukraine is behaving more Western, and they become more decent. But that's not their history. They're not democratic people. If Israel's attacked, that might create a third world war, because then you're attacking a decent people with a decent history. But in fact, that's why Israel is not attacked, because everybody knows that would lead to a war.
Yeah.
So the Arabs are not really attacking. They're not going to nuke Israel because their history. If they nuke, Israel can fight back better than Taiwan and Ukraine can. But very close. Those three countries are very close. Those could be a cause for a third world war.
Yeah, interesting.
So Kissinger says ambiguity. Don't give them. Don't say too much.
Interesting. Well, that's a good point. It was wise man, Mr. Kissinger, Secretary Kissinger. I think we're about out of time for this episode, but again, certainly been thought-provoking, and appreciate it. And I want to encourage our viewers, our listeners, to pick up copies of your books, of David's books, and Income and Wealth and a San Francisco Conservative. You can do that by visiting David's website, davidparkeressays.com, or by going to Amazon. So thanks again. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you. Thank you.